My name is Robert Hayes. I'm an associate professor of nuclear engineering at North Carolina State University. There I administer the undergraduate minor in health physics and the graduate certificate in health physics, and I teach those classes. I do have the coolest lab on campus. I have an amazing lab with some of the coolest instrumentation, and I do, in my opinion, the coolest research. But in principle, every faculty member should say that. They should. But I believe it's true. I do the coolest research. And I do public outreach on misinformation about nuclear science and technology. And as such, I made a proposal with the Department of Energy for a research project to evaluate how to communicate to people about the facts, the science behind nuclear science and technology, nuclear energy specifically. And this was based on the best science that I'd seen out there that was published by the social scientists and the psychologists and so forth. How do you get somebody who has a narrative that they might associate with why they're a good person, like being anti-nuclear, and how do you allow them to see that they can update that narrative with what looks like contradictory information that would enable them to see themselves as being a better person, so to speak, by updating their narrative. Even though at face value, right from a cold start, they might think that you are on the other side or you're in the other tribe. You're not in their tribe, but how do you get somebody to feel comfortable with updating a narrative that they had previously used to tell themselves that they're a good person, like being anti-nuclear? Because I love math and physics. Since I was a boy, I wanted to be a scientist. And after I did some time in the Navy, I went hardcore, did a double major in math and physics, fell in love with it. But at the time, that's when I started a family. And I learned the hard way that just having a degree in math or physics, both, doesn't really make much of a difference. Not a lot of money out there. And I wanted to provide better for my family. So I thought, well, then I'll get a graduate degree. That'll allow me to make more money. Well, a graduate degree, master's degree in physics, there really wasn't a lot of jobs out there that paid well. And I looked around and I saw, the only jobs that you get, entry-level jobs out of school, is if you're in engineering. Those are the only jobs where you get a decent starting salary, where you can, raise a family and provide for them in the way that I wanted to. And it just so happened at the university I was at that they had a graduate program in nuclear engineering. And it was like, oh, I didn't have to give up any math and physics. And I could do all of the math and physics and do something really cool like nuclear energy. And so I got my PhD in nuclear engineering and never looked back. All things nuclear allows you to have, I would say, the richest math and physics that's out there. Every other form of science and engineering is almost literally just juggling valence electrons. Chemistry, materials, all forms of engineering is controlling nature in terms of the external visible part. When I'm doing any kind of construction or manufacturing, all I'm really doing is rearranging those valence electrons. In nuclear, you have to do that, plus you do that with the valence nucleons. So you have to get into the nuclear part of it as well. And so to me, it's just a lot more rich in terms of the physics that you do when you're doing nuclear engineering as opposed to any other engineering discipline. And so to me, it's just, there's a lot more to it. It's much more attractive. And in terms of the energy, it's the same reason why we find fusion attractive is why fission is attractive. It's flat out, full stop, nothing more than energy density. It's a phenomenal energy density, and that's why nuclear is so attractive. That's why fusion is attractive. The same reason fission is attractive is why fusion is attractive. Let me put this in context for you. This will really sharpen it up. I pointed out earlier that all other forms of engineering or controlling nature, it's some form of rearranging valence electrons, the outer orbital electrons around materials, around atoms. You're just juggling how they interact with each other and how these atoms bond and make things like chemical engineering. When I do that, when I burn fossil fuels, for example, that's about 1 electron volt per atom in the combustion process. When I fission a uranium-235, I get 200 million electron volts per atom. 200 million electron volts per atom versus 1 electron volt per atom. The energy density is phenomenal. And so what that means is I need so little amount of materials, so little amount of land, so little amount of area of land mass and mining and milling and waste. And that's why fusion is attractive. It's energy density. With fusion, you get about, say, maybe 10 million electron volts per atom, something like that. Or if you do by mass, you get more energy per mass with fusion than with fission. With fission, you just have these massive nuclei. With fusion, you have these smaller ones. But it comes back down many, many millions of times higher energy density than you get with anything else. And that's why it's so attractive, because you can have such a sustainable form of energy, such a small impact on the environment. The idea is, at least my passion, is that everybody has our standard of living with a much smaller footprint, with a tiny little negligible environmental impact, so that with the area that we have with a city, that could be everything that we would need, and we would leave nature pristine. I love that in the United States, we have recognized the utility and the benefit and the importance of saying that there is some land that is so important that we're going to pass a law that the only thing you can do is look at it. And the only infrastructure that can go there is the infrastructure that allows you to look at it. And what you can touch is limited. And this is what you can touch, and you can touch nothing else. Everything else you just look at or you just touch. You can't do anything else. And that's the national parks. But there's so much more that's beautiful out there that to me, it just seems, it seems heinous to say, well, there's land that's not being used. We need to find a use for it. It's like, oh, please no. But I understand, when it comes to agriculture, you need agriculture. But for energy, when there are other alternatives for energy where you can have such a negligible environmental footprint for energy, why would you want to have a massive environmental footprint for energy when you can have a negligible one? To me, it's just such a compelling story.
Love that. That was great. It really explained it to me like I'm a toddler.
The energy density that you have with nuclear is so extreme that when you take into consideration just the United States, we've received about 20% of our electricity for 50 years. Now, this is the biggest economy on the planet. We're a manufacturing powerhouse. And 20% of our electricity for 50 years is just an enormous amount of energy. All of the spent nuclear fuel from all of that energy, that 20% for 50 years, all of that used nuclear fuel would not fill up a single football field above 10 meters high. That's the kind of energy density I'm talking about, where you have a negligible environmental impact for a massive amount of energy. And that's the way that we would be able to enable people to have a high standard of living with a negligible environmental impact. Because everything takes energy, right? Healthcare, food, transportation, logistics, economy, communication, everything takes energy. And you want to be able to have, and it's not just for electricity, it's for everything else, manufacturing, concrete, steel, all of these things, fertilizer, they take energy. And if we're burning fossil fuels or using something that's got low energy density, you're going to have a much larger impact in the environment if you have low energy density. But with fusion and fission, you have a low energy density that makes it so that it's not just that it's sustainable, that it becomes negligible. That's what's really attractive. Sustainability is great and it's important, but we can do so much better, and we should, because we can. Let me give you an antithesis of that. There is a material in science that we know of. It's often called dihydrogen monoxide. You could also call it oxidane. This material, it is the primary chemical component in every deadly cancer. The primary component in every deadly bacteria. This material has the highest pH for any acid known in nature. The highest pH. Thousands of people, literally thousands of people, every year in the United States die from inhalation of this chemical. It can be said accurately that everybody who has ever ingested it or that does ingest it will die. This stuff has got such unique properties, it is literally used as the coolant in a nuclear reactor. It's water. It's the primary component in cancer, bacteria. It's got the highest pH of any acid because it's a pH of 7, which is right at the boundary between an acid and a base. So it's the highest pH of any acid and the lowest pH of any base. And thousands of people die from inhalation every year. And everybody who has ever ingested it or will die. And so I can spin something to sound horrible because everything I said was true. But everything I said was misleading because I took it out of context. And the context is, yes, there are risks with water, but we know how to mitigate those. A window is another good example, right? There are windows all in this room in here. How dangerous is a window? Well, if it's broken, it's pretty dangerous, but then if it's broken, you know to treat it differently. Because you could come up with another narrative. How many people can I kill with a broken window? I don't know, maybe millions. That doesn't mean that they're dangerous and they need to be handled like they're weapons of mass destruction just because I theoretically could. And that's the kind of narratives that you get about nuclear. They say, if I chopped it up into little pieces and I fed it to everybody, this is how many people I could kill. And it's like, people don't eat trash. And we know we don't put trash in places that people are going to eat or that becomes part of the food chain. But that doesn't mean that that narrative isn't scary and that that narrative isn't compelling and that that narrative isn't convincing, right? Like the dihydrogen monoxide. Everything I said about it was true, but that doesn't mean that it was in context by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, radiophobia. Well, radiophobia is, it's a clinical thing. I didn't actually come up with that term. It's been around way before I was. Radiophobia just means a fear of radiation. And where it's usually manifested is people that will refuse medical treatment because they're afraid the radiation will give them cancer. And to my knowledge, there is no competent doctor that will set a bone that doesn't have an x-ray. They're just not going to risk, puncturing a vein in the middle of trying to set the bone. It's just not worth it. They're going to say, you can live with a broken bone or you can let me give you an x-ray. Because I'm not going to set that bone without knowing what's going on inside. Because I either x-ray it or I cut it, right? Which is worse, obviously. You want to x-ray it, obviously. But what happens is that the theory is that you and I and all of us, we're programmed with a lot of things. We might not like the idea of realizing that we're programmed. We're programmed with a lot of things, right? Eating, sleeping, reproduction. There's a lot of things that our chemicals cause us to do, and one of those is fight or flight. From our hunter-gatherer days, when we hear, a rustling in the woods, you're not going to be able to help it, but you're going to think, is that a bear, right? Is that a mountain lion? Is that what you're going to think? What's the worst that could possibly be? That's your default, because if it is just the wind and the leaves, and you treat it like it's a bear, fight or flight, all right, you go and burn off your adrenaline that you pumped off, or you just simply shut it off when you turn around and you see it's nothing. You can't really do that with radiation without some education. When you hear that there was some radiation there, that can be terrifying. Let me give you an example that really contextualize this. If I told you literally that when you went to the Sonano-free nuclear generating station yesterday, that what you did yesterday cost you a radiation dose of 10 to the minus 5 joules per kilogram. It's like, I have no idea what is that? A health physicist like myself would literally have to sit there and do a calculation for 5 seconds and go, oh, okay. Because what is that? It's a bunch of gobbledygook. And if a health physicist has to do a calculation in their head and figure it out, what does a member of the public know, right? 10 to the minus 5 joules per kilogram, if it's gamma and beta, is a millirem. That's about what you get in a day just from natural sources, just because you're alive. And if I told you before that you got a millirem, it might mean the same thing. You might think, what is that? I have no idea. Should I be afraid? Am I going to get cancer? How bad is it? And so it's kind of a default self-protection mechanism that you have some unknown, you assume it's as bad as it could possibly be, and the worst something could possibly be is that you die, right? You're going to get cancer and you're going to die, because you don't know, right? I mean, you didn't go to college. I tell this joke. It's not a joke. It's actually serious. But I had a colleague, another health physicist. I was working at a place called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, a geological repository for transuranic waste. He was complaining about something that a technician did. And he was, I think they mixed up the probes, an alpha probe for a beta probe. To me, it wasn't that big of a deal. It just meant you had to redo the data, right? But he was getting frustrated because you had to redo the data. And he said, come on, it's not rocket science. And I said to him, you're right, it's not rocket science, but it is nuclear science. He was like, okay, whatever. Because it is, right? I mean, this is stuff that you don't learn in high school. You don't learn unless you take a class in college in nuclear science of some sort. Otherwise, it's gobbledygook.
So
You're asking why are there anti-nuclear movements out there? Why are there groups that identify as anti-nuclear? There are a lot of theories that are out there. I have seen some that are partially substantiated. I've never seen conclusive evidence. There's a lot of people that like to argue that this is the fact, but I've never seen conclusive evidence that big oil initiated the process, recognizing long ago, back in the 60s, that the only thing that could possibly take away their share was nuclear. That's really the main thing that it would have replaced was fossil fuels back then. That may have very well been a large part of it. Another large part of it was the depiction that you get in Hollywood, like what happened at 3 Mile Island following the China Syndrome movie. That fanned a lot of it. What I was able to track down was, and this I do believe did contribute, because I was able to find what I found credible evidence, was that the anti-nuclear weapons movement, when there really wasn't more progress to be made, when we came to an equilibrium situation internationally, that they largely turned their attention to nuclear energy as opposed to staying focused on nuclear weapons and trying to ban nuclear weapons. Now, to what extent they brought us to where we are today, I really can't say, but I do believe that did contribute, that the anti-nuclear war movement did focus their attention on nuclear energy, and that set the stage for largely some of the motivation for these workshops that we're doing. And that's that when that kind of came to a frenzy, the DNC actually put into the party platform being anti-nuclear. And I think that's what really was the death knell. And the reason why is that there are a lot of people that, most of us, is another one of the things that the psychologists tell us, that we're tribalistic in nature. We're social creatures, right? That's another thing you're programmed for. You might not like the idea of being programmed, but that's the way that we're built to interact with people. And through our hunter-gatherer scenario, actually, I got a great way to prove it. There's this Stanford professor, Robert Sapolsky, and I love the way that he put it. It was like this: if you were to throw somebody out in the wilderness, they're going to die, right? Maybe a couple people won't. Throw a couple people out in the wilderness, they'll probably die too. Very few won't. You throw 10 people out in the wilderness, okay, they got a better chance because they can work together. They can share narratives. And by sharing narratives, that enables them to survive. I throw 100 people out there, they're probably much closer to being able to be sustainable because they can share narratives. They can say, you do firewood, you do building structures, you do clothing, you do agriculture, you do water, you do latrine. And everybody can share narratives and figure out how we're going to take on nature and win. And by the time you have 10,000, you've got a society that can live indefinitely. But it's because we share narratives. That's the unique thing about us and our language, is that we're able to share narratives. And where that folds into the nuclear realm is that if you take a position in your narrative as to why you're a good person, anything that's part of that narrative becomes sacrosanct. Whatever narratives you use to tell yourself you're a good person, we all have them, right? It's another of the things that we do, because that's our species. Whatever those narratives are, if somebody challenges those, that's offensive. That's reject right away. So that you can't go from one political side of the aisle and say, hey, here's some facts that oppose your narrative, to the other side and say, update your narrative. If the people on both sides of those political parties use their politics as part of their narrative to say why they're a good person, you can't challenge that, right? And that's what these workshops are about, is what did the psychologist say is required for somebody who's done that? And once the DNC did that, for those people, not everybody does it, but a lot of people do, for those that use their politics to explain to themselves why they're a good person, any part of those political narratives are part of why you tell yourself you're a good person, and that's sacrosanct. You can't challenge that. What the social scientists tell us is that this is how it works. This is how we think. This is how you think. This is how I think. This is what they tell us. The only way that you can update a narrative like that is somebody from the inside, a trusted person, has to be able to say, look, we know you're a good person. We all agree that we agree with that. All these narratives that we share, these are evidence that we're a good person. However, there is a way we can be a better person. We can improve. Here are some facts that we can use to update our narrative that was never false, and now we can be a better person. And so that's the approach that we're trying to take in these workshops, is to say, we absolutely are environmentalists. I have a member of the team is probably the most extreme environmentalist you could imagine. He's not going to necessarily tell you this, he might, but being a Native American, he sees it in his worldview. The earth is your mother, the sky is your father, and the water is your blood. And why that's important, the way that you interpret that. I mean, it's like you could easily get into twisting that, like Protestants say about the Eucharist, or that, you can twist the way that people see that. But let me tell you the way that he sees that before you start looking at it in Western view. It's like this. If it's a member of your family, then it has to work. It has to produce. It has to contribute. That is absolutely fundamentally a requirement. But you will love them, you will cherish them, and you'll care for them because it's a member of your family. Work is just something that everybody has to do because you're in a tribe. You have to work, but you will be cared for and you will be loved. And that's nature to them. So you don't get to be more of an extreme environmentalist in my book when you call nature your sister, your mother, your brother, your father, right? And so he comes out and he points out why he's pro-nuclear. And it's because, crazy thing, Diablo Nuclear Power Plant is smack dab in the middle of his homeland, right? It's on one of their ancient villages. And when you look at the Diablo Nuclear Power Plant in their homeland and you zoom out, you see 14 miles of pristine, untouched California coastland with a tiny little postage stamp that supplies electricity for millions of homes. That is quintessential Native values. And so it took them decades to get over it, but it was like, the truth just kept coming back and saying, this is what we love. This is what we value. And so he's very pro-nuclear. And so that helps set the stage. We are on the same page here. We are on the same team, and we're showing you how to update your narrative to be a better person. Not that you were a bad person. Never say that. You were a good person. But this is how you can be a better person, by improving. And then Mothers for Nuclear comes up. Mothers for Nuclear is, women that were anti-nuclear that searched and seeked and found that nuclear is the way. But it took years. It took years because they had the typical radiophobic fears that nuclear risk is you can't mitigate it. That the risks are insurmountable, and it's not something that can be controlled or managed. And the truth won over. And so she's able to show from a very nurturing, a very empathetic perspective. And then after they share their story, I just get up and I just do basically a college lecture. That's really what it is. It's just, all right, so here's the science. Right, these guys talk to you about, virtue signaling and showing you that, demonstrating by our values that we are on the same on the same page. But, all right, so here's the science. Here's the data that would enable you to update your narrative to do even better than what you thought you could do or were doing possibly. Yeah, so that's actually not what the workshops are. Yeah, I can see how it would look like that. What the workshops are is it's literally just research. It's, all right, so this is what the social scientists say is required to enable somebody to update their narrative with contradictory information. You've got to go through this process of trust building to say, okay, I see that you're on my team and you're going to show me how to do better. And so once you show me how to do better and then I can do better, will I be able to do better? And so what it is that we do surveys before and after, and the surveys are designed to determine the extent to which this entire workshop will enable somebody to make a risk-informed decision. So literally, if you look at the workshop or the surveys, if somebody decides that they want to do pure renewables with natural gas backup, that's perfectly fine and acceptable because it's cheap, it's fast, as long as it's not based on misinformation. That's all that we're doing, is enabling people to make risk-informed decisions that are not based on misinformation. That's really what we're testing, is does this communication technique enable a general member of the public to do that? And so that's the metric that we're looking at, is does this communication technique enable people to do that, to make risk-informed decisions that are not based on scientific misinformation? So we committed ourselves, at least it was in the proposal, that we were really just focusing on stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder they're the thought leaders. So the workshops are focused really towards stakeholders. So they're open to the general public, but the way that we're able to naturally, passively weed out people that are not stakeholders is that it's really an entire Saturday. The workshops are designed so that you basically commit an entire Saturday. So if you're willing to commit an entire Saturday to talking about used nuclear fuel and radiological risk, you're a stakeholder. Now, the way that we defined a stakeholder is somebody that is a thought leader for all intents and purposes. And you might think, well, what is a thought leader? Anybody could be a thought leader. It means that you're passionate about something to defend it and to promote it. It could be anything. A good example might be squeaky cheese, right? If you've ever been to Wisconsin, they make these curds that are squeaky when you eat them. They're delicious. And if somebody were to make a comment about them, only the stakeholders would defend a position. Anybody else would let whatever was stated go because they don't care, right? So the stakeholder is the one that does care about that. Somebody that's not, if somebody has a position, you don't care. If somebody says this is true and you don't care, you're not a stakeholder. But if somebody makes a claim that you think is not true and you're going to defend it or oppose it, then you're potentially a stakeholder. That's all that it is somebody who is that passionate about the subject that they're going to defend or promote or take action and not be passive about it. So anybody then that would spend their entire Saturday for nothing but just meals, they are by definition a stakeholder, and they're the ones that you would need to interact with because everybody else is going to go with whatever is said. Right? It's only the stakeholders in their group, in their social group, that's actually going to basically decide the position of that group because nobody else cares. And so that's who we're reaching out to and testing this on. Does this work for stakeholders? And the results are entirely impressive, showing that even people that identify as being very anti-nuclear, that it does make some inroads for them. There are some exceptions, but the general results are overwhelming. That with a great deal of statistical significance, that the stakeholders that we've been able to get to come to these are able to improve their ability to make risk-informed decisions that are not based on scientific misinformation, is to quantify the utility of this technique. There are a number of consortia. There were 12 consortia, and they are evaluating other means. And they may very well be far better, or maybe there's going to be some combination of those. This is just the idea that I had, that I was able to put together, that got funded, and then it's up to the DOE to decide to what extent they're going to utilize or incorporate any of the findings from the consortia. And this is just one of 12 consortia. And again, it was just to test that hypothesis that was put forth by the social scientists in terms of what is required for you to update your narrative with contradictory information.
Got it. So the goal of the workshops
is to determine if this communication technique actually does enable members of the general public to make risk-informed decisions that are not based on scientific misinformation. How good is it? Is it worth using? Is it worth investing in? Is it worth pursuing? And to what extent? How good does this work versus other things? I would say that the reason why spent fuel is a hot topic is because it's a potential showstopper, right? So if I went to your house and I said, you can no longer let any waste go outside your house, pretty soon it would become uninhabitable, right? If I stop you from being able to dispose of the waste. The only reason that hasn't worked with nuclear is because it's just such a small amount, right? If you only generated a gram of waste per day, right, you'd have a third of a kilogram in a year, right? You could put that in a Coke can potentially, right? And so you could go many, many years in just storing these Coke cans and not have it being a problem if that was all the waste that you generated. Basically anything else, if you did that, especially that didn't have that same energy density, the waste would be enormous. And you can make the waste sound enormous if you use units that are like that, like in pounds or kilograms, it can sound big, but it's very dense. And so you can use those kinds of numbers to spin it like the dihydrogen monoxide and make it sound bad when it's not. For me, the reason why I would like to do it is simply because of the money.
And do what?
So if you, right now, by law, the Department of Energy is required by law to take possession of the used nuclear fuel, and they're supposed to put it in a geological repository. Given that they haven't done that, they're still by law accountable for it. And so if a nuclear power plant had to modify their facility to accommodate these extra volumes of used nuclear fuel, it comes back to the Department of Energy to pay for that, right? And so when we're storing this stuff on site, the Department of Energy is paying for that. And honestly, I think it'd be kind of nice if it was you and I that was making that money instead of a large utility. But in a sense, they earned it. But if I was able to have it in my community, I would much rather my community get those benefits than this utility. Oh, it's incredibly safe. Oh, it's phenomenally safe. I would, when you look at the requirements to license a cask, they're virtually indestructible. They have to fall like 30 feet onto an unyielding surface, 40 inches onto a steel bar. They have to be burned at almost 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit for half an hour, and then submerged 50 foot underwater for 8 hours, and sequentially go through all of that and then not leak for a fully loaded. So, I mean, you can destroy them, but they're virtually indestructible. As a certified health physicist, a licensed professional engineer, a professor of nuclear engineering, I would much rather somebody try to destroy one of those like a terrorist or in a war than, like a bus or a cafe or something, because those will scare people. And I'd much rather see people be scared than dead. They're virtually indestructible. Now you could, if you kept shooting more and more ordnance at them, you would be able to destroy them. But again, I would think, you just make a big radioactive mess right there, but that's much better than a bunch of bombs in an inhabited area where, we can come back and clean this up, but we can't get those people back. Spent fuel is incredibly safe. We have yet to see it hurt anybody. Oh, it was first through Heather. Basically, Mothers for Nuclear had been advocating for nuclear energy for some time, and I think it was a YouTube video that had them on there, and they were known in the community. And when I had this idea, I went out to all of the people that I knew that were active, and Mothers for Nuclear was one of them. And for some reason, Heather and I clicked. She loved my vision. I told her about the research. I spelled out the research that I wanted to do and why I needed somebody like her to be able to test this hypothesis and see and put a metric to it and see how effective it really is. And when Heather saw that, it was like, oh my goodness, we need Scott Lathrop. And she was dead to rights that we needed Scott Lathrop. So she gave me his contact information. I called up Scott, and Scott saw the vision, and he was like, yeah, this sounds like this is really good research, something that I should team up with you on. And that was it. Correct. This is a consortium. North Carolina State University is the lead on this consortium, where we test this hypothesis that if you show people that you are in their tribe, that you share their values, that you have the same priorities that they do, and that you have the same goals, that you are then able to enable them to update their narrative where there is misinformation that was involved in that, and say, hey, yeah, I get that. We have exactly the same values. We want to preserve nature and we want to promote life, but we want to do both at the same time. And this is how we can do that, not give up one for the other, but to get them both in a great way. Collaboration-based siting is the requirement that was put forth by the Blue Ribbon Commission. They originally called it consent-based siting. The expectation is that you get buy-in from all levels of stakeholders, from local government all the way up to state government. And if you have buy-in from them, then you're not going to be opposed either from grassroots organizations or from the state legislature. They're not going to try to pass laws that will prevent you from doing collaborative-based siting. And our consortia is simply determining whether this communication technique is effective at enabling people to update their narratives with contradictory information when it comes to nuclear science and technology, assuming that they actually had narratives that were based on scientific misinformation. How does collaborative-based siting influence spent fuel? In order to site a location for spent fuel, you're going to have buy-in from the community, from the stakeholders, all the way from the grassroots organizations, all the way up to the state legislature. Otherwise, anything in between that could, in theory, oppose your siting of used nuclear fuel and stop it. And so how do you get buy-in from all of these different groups? That's what the workshops are trying to enable the Department of Energy to see. What is the lay of the land? What are the obstacles that you're going to have to overcome? And what are the potential paths forward? So how does collaborative-based siting influence the used nuclear fuel in the future? It comes down to being able to determine how we're going to find a solution for the used nuclear fuel. And what we know is that you have to have consent or collaboration or buy-in from all levels of stakeholders, from the grassroots all the way up to the state legislature. Because if you don't, any one of them in between, from the grassroots or the state legislature, they could stop it in principle. That's what we know has happened in the past, and that's what we expect in the future, unless you get buy-in from all levels of the stakeholders, from the very ground to the very top. And if we do that, then in principle, we can actually have a solution to use nuclear fuel. And that's what the consortia are about. The consortia are about finding what's the lay of the land, what are the paths forward that could be taken, what are the obstacles that have to be overcome. And I'm probably moving too much already again. I'm very, very dynamic. I think there's a noise. Oh. Collaboration-based siting is figuring out how to get consent or buy-in from all levels of government. But it has to go all the way down to the grassroots. What are the grassroots organizations? All the way up to the state legislature. Because anything in between, NGOs, anything in between, in principle, could put a stop to it, and has. And so collaborative-based siting requires that you get collaboration or consent from all of these levels, and that you've established that they want this and that they welcome this. And once you've had that, then you have the confidence that you can apply the science if they're not going to oppose it. And what we found in the past is that without knowing what those are going to be, it's difficult to get that. And so the consortia that were funded are largely charged with going out and finding out what the topography is, doing the map making and finding out what the obstacles are and what the different possible pathways are, so that once all that's known by the DOE, they can forge a path forward and say, how are we going to get collaborative insight for all of these different bids that are going to come in? Because people are going to make bids, but they're not going to want to pursue those bids unless they believe that they can get that kind of buy-in from all levels of state government, all the way down to the grassroots, from that particular person that wants to put it in their backyard.
Spent fuel.
In order to get the buy-in that we're looking for on used nuclear fuel. In order to get the buy-in that we need for used nuclear fuel, we have to get the buy-in from the grassroots organizations all the way up to the state government. And then we'll know that we can have a viable path forward for a site of any kind, because we expect that there are going to be a lot of people that want this in their backyard, but they're not all going to have that collaborative buy-in at all levels if the Department of Energy does pick to a given site to pursue. Yes, nuclear energy is incredibly exciting. There are so many things that are exciting. Being able, probably the biggest thing that I think is the most attractive is the potential ability to take developing nations and allow them to leapfrog all of the pain that we had to go through to get our standard of living, to leapfrog fossil fuels, so that they can have a high standard of living with a negligible environmental impact. Kind of what happened, say, with China and cell phones. They leapfrogged over all the telephone lines, right? All of the environmental impact that came from the telephone lines is not there, because they just went to cell towers and cell phones. And a similar kind of a leapfrog could occur with developing nations. So you take a very populous area like maybe Bangladesh or India or Kenya or something like that. I don't know where you have these large population densities. And if they don't have clean, reliable energy, their standard of living is going to be severely impacted if you don't have electricity to have a good economy, to have refrigeration and heating and cooking and transportation and communication and everything that we take for granted that makes our life comfortable. Being able to provide that to them, that to me is the biggest and most exciting thing. I mean, there are lots of really cool little science things that I do, like non-proliferation and nuclear forensics. That's really cool stuff. But I think the biggest impact really just comes down to enabling people everywhere to have an incredible standard of living with a negligible environmental impact. That's the biggest right there. That's just the quintessential goal, I would say. Yes, I came up with a hyperbreeder reactor. This one Oh my goodness, there are just so many exciting things about it. So it uses natural uranium, so you don't need uranium enrichment. So it's a very strong proliferation control that it uses natural uranium, kind of like a CANDU reactor in that sense. But because it's a hyperbreeder, it turns the plutonium. So all nuclear reactors are going to create plutonium, unless it's a thorium-based reactor, and then they make fissile uranium-233. But with a uranium fuel cycle, all of them will make plutonium. But this one, because it's a hyperbreeder, the plutonium is rapidly degraded into a reactor grade as opposed to being weapons grade. So with a traditional reactor, if you wanted to make nuclear weapons, you would run the reactor for a short period of time, a few months, and then extract the fuel, reprocess it, and get out the plutonium. If you run it like a commercial nuclear reactor and you burn it for a couple months, or a couple of years, then the plutonium is not good for nuclear weapons. It's messy with the wrong isotopes. And my reactor basically gets that a lot faster, makes that happen a lot faster. So it's far more proliferation resistant. And I have a student that's working on it right now for small modular reactors, and it looks like it's got some really exciting potential for fission batteries. Fission batteries are really exciting technology in the sense that a fission battery is being developed right now at Idaho National Laboratory for the Army. And why that's exciting, you're going to like this. Why these fission batteries are exciting is because once they develop them for the Army, they're basically going to have to design them to be battle hard. You can deploy them in like Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that, and enable the Army to be divorced from fossil fuels. Now imagine this. So if the Army, now what they want is they want what the Department of Energy gave to the Navy. Why the Navy can be underwater for many, many months, 6 to 9 months at a time until they run out of food. And the Army wants that, right? So that they don't have to have these convoys that are exposed to IEDs, and they would be able to power everything. Now imagine this. So once the Army has that, in principle, they could electrify their entire fleet so that a tank or an armored cargo ship or a personnel carrier, any of those things would just have swappable batteries. So you charge up their battery, you put 1 or 2 extras on there, and they can go out until their batteries come back and charge them up. And your fossil fuel needs are just almost gone. And if that can be made battle hard, then transferring that to the civilian sector is just so much easier. If this thing can withstand battle conditions, then it's going to be safe in a civilian sector. And if it's safe in a civilian sector, we're not going to need this grid infrastructure for transportation. People can have these locally distributed, and we don't need extra transmission lines because now we can start to supplement transmission or energy generation locally with these fission batteries that are generated to be battle hard for the U.S. Army. And so it's really exciting for the future that if we go with electric cars, which looks like we're going to be, that with once the military has really attractive rechargeable batteries for their technology, is paid for you by your tax dollars, right? It just some commercial vendor then is able to start making these, and we just make sure they don't have a monopoly, and we can largely divorce our transportation sector from fossil fuels. It's just a really attractive feature. So there's a lot of new technology out there that's like that. So it's really exciting. Like I do nuclear forensics, and that's really exciting. And I do reactor technology, some limited kind, and that's really exciting. There's just a lot of stuff that's really exciting about nuclear science and technology. I'm most passionate about, I guess I see my role as helping to enable people to welcome the benefits that this science and technology has to offer, so that they're not opposed to using that to shrink our environmental footprint and maintain a high standard of living. 'Cause you're not going to get people to quit using their cell phones because they're not environmentally friendly. All that we're going to be able to get people to do is to source the materials for the cell phones in a more environmentally friendly way, or use a lot less energy, those kinds of things. You're not going to get anybody, at least not an American, I don't think, as a general rule, to say, oh, I'm gonna live like the Amish. The Amish will do that, but there are very limited people that will, and all the rest of us are going to expect to maintain this standard of living. But with nuclear, we can minimize that impact, and that's what I guess I'm most passionate about is by communicating to people the myths about radiological risk, the misunderstandings that are out there, that will enable them to make risk-informed decisions. Because once you've done that, Once a person makes risk-informed decisions, then everything's balanced. And when somebody says, you know, glass windows are too dangerous because a single window in principle could kill 10 million people, therefore we're going to ban all windows, right? It's like, it's not that difficult to mitigate the danger from windows, right? I mean, theoretically you could, but that's not what happens, right? Or any other narrative that you might come up with to make something that's otherwise innocuous sound like it's horrifically dangerous, like water, like dihydrogen monoxide.
One thing being.
Oh, the Department of Energy. So my issue with the Department of Energy, with the federal government, is the disadvantage that we have with Russia and China. And that's that because our capitalistic society requires that you have some massive investor, like a billionaire or somebody, has to come up with the money to build a new facility, right? That's how we do any kind of a factory. An investor, you have to get investors to come up with the money and build it. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen, right? But in China, you know, they're, for all intents and purposes, it's a dictatorship, and they can just do whatever they want. Same with Russia, right? And so they've got state money that they can throw at these things and say, all right, I will just loan you the money right outright. And they can have very predatory loans that they would give to people. But the United States government doesn't do that, right? And I think that the United States government could make very friendly, you know, low interest, friendly loans to people, like what we do with something along the lines of housing, where you're able to say, all right, if you have good enough credit, right, I can give you this kind of an interest rate. But we don't do that internationally. And because Russia and China do, they're beating us to the punch. And what that means is that they're going to be the ones that are dictating the kind of technology that developing nations are going to be using. And so if I was to say something to the Department of Energy or the government, it would be to extend our capitalistic principles that we have for our citizenry to other nations, to enable them to also be able to receive these kinds of beneficial treatment when it comes to bringing about new infrastructure into there. Now, it does also require that they've got to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is fine. I absolutely 100% agree with that. They've got to be completely sold on accepting IAEA inspections, but that's a real easy sell as a general rule. Almost everybody's like, well, obviously, as a general rule. But that's what I would like to see, is that the United States was able to play on the international scale in a way that's competitive with Russia and China. Right now, it's basically quality. It's like, you want the best quality, you got to go to America. Everybody already knows that, but it's a higher hill to climb, because you're not going to be given those advantageous loans to be able to build this kind of thing, which we really only give to our citizens. So I wouldn't have necessarily a soundbite for them that I would come up with. So Heather has taught me, and God bless her, she loves me. She tells me the truth, and she says, Rob, you're not good at soft skills. I own it. I get it. It's true. And so my default right now, I would just try to listen to them and then ask questions. That's probably what I would default to, because I've been calibrated by Heather Hoff of Mothers for Nuclear that spitting facts just doesn't work. Yeah, the spitting facts, it's like one side of the political aisle goes to the other side and says, hey, here's some facts that contradict your narrative. Go update it. It's like, not going to work. Let me tell you how I got on TikTok. This is an interesting story. So when I came to state, I was in industry for 15 years, and then I came to NC State to teach. And I put together a program, a set of programs in health physics. Health physics is like a code word for radiation safety and radiological protection. So I put together an undergraduate minor in health physics and a graduate certificate in health physics. I'm the only member of faculty that actually teaches health physics. So in order to do both of those, I had to do some double dipping. And in order to do the double dipping, what I did to meet all of the criteria that are needed for academic credentials is that a lot of the courses for the minor you had to take as a senior. And most of the courses for the graduate certificate you take as a first-year master's student. And the only difference between those courses is if you take the course as a master's student, you have to do a research project. Otherwise, they're the same course. And so that met all the criteria for accreditation, for ABET, for everything. That meets all of the criteria. Everything is on the up and up. So what happened was in order to guarantee that they did a really hard research project. I wasn't going to let them do an easy research project. The requirement for the research project was that they had to address one of the 10 grand challenges that was identified by the American Nuclear Society. So, I mean, this will force the student to see how their research, what they're doing, folds into the big picture, right? How they're really making a difference. You're going to have to dig in and show how you're making a difference in these hard projects. You're going to have to do something hard. And I never expected this, but more than half of the students picked the number one grand challenge. It was like, why would anybody do that? Why would you pick the hardest problem? Who does that, right? Who picks the hardest problem? But the majority of the students were doing that. And the number one grand challenge was public communication. And so that's where I got indoctrinated, because I wasn't an expert on public communication on nuclear. I'm just a professor, a guy that was in academia, right? That's it. I'm not a public communicator. But I started reading their research, and it was good. And they started to show a consistent theme. It was basically always the same. It was some form of social media. Their argument was basically, you're not going to be able to convince a stakeholder unless you build a long-lasting relationship with that stakeholder. But the rest of the people, which is the majority of people, they'll listen if they think that you have an authoritative platform or an authoritative figure that's saying these are the facts. Like, I mean, you're not going to get into an argument with somebody about some astrophysical phenomena. You're going to say, well, whoever thinks that they know what astrophysics says about that, I'm going to let them say that because I'm not an expert. And it's the same kind of a concept. That's what they were saying, is that the majority of people don't identify as a stakeholder. They're not going to argue it one way or the other. They're going to ask questions. They'll be anti-nuclear, but they're not necessarily going to know why. That's just what they were told. For most people, that's the way that it is. They really don't know anything more other than nuclear waste or Fukushima or Chernobyl or cancer, 3 Mile Island, those kinds of things. That's as far as their knowledge goes, and so they're not going to in any way challenge any kind of an authoritative voice that says, well, there's a lot more to it. I mean, okay, well, I'm sure there is. I don't know. Tell me what it is. And so that was what they kept saying, is you're going to have to go on social media to do this. And so my response was always, you're a graduate student in nuclear engineering. Why don't you do that? Right? I mean, this is good stuff. You're right. I agree. These students were getting A's. And they're like, no, not me. There's got to be somebody else. I'm like, well, then who? And it just was consistently like this. Like, you're perfect for it. I mean, you're a brilliant graduate student. You're getting a PhD in nuclear engineering. They will listen. They're like, well, maybe so, but I'm not going to do it. I can't do that. I can't put myself out there. And this just kept happening. It was like for 4 or 5 years straight, I couldn't get a single student to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. I mean, they had to do a full paper, a full PowerPoint, and a full video presentation, just like you would for a conference presentation. It's literally what the criteria was, how they were graded. The same criteria from the American Society for Engineering Education. Their rubric was what the students had to meet. And so what finally did it was lockdown. I bought a violin, I bought a saxophone, I took YouTube lessons, but I could make it look like I know how to play. I don't. But it was like, what else am I going to do, right? I'm doing my lectures, I did my grading, and I figured, well, maybe I need to do it. I've got the time. And so during lockdown is when I started doing videos. And my son of mine is also viral out there. Right now he's on YouTube, but then he was viral on TikTok. He had like 1 million followers, and he convinced me that TikTok was the demographic that I needed to target, and that I needed to train the algorithm early, because I knew neural nets. I knew enough about machine learning to know that when he said that, he was right. You got to train the algorithm so that when people who are interested in that go looking, they'll find good information. And I have to train the algorithm, and this is where they go for the good information. And so that was what started it all. It was my students that convinced me that you had to go on to social media to make a difference today, because that was the most cost-effective way to address the issue.
Are you surprised that it took off?
I am, yeah. I did not expect that. There have been a number of surprises that have come from that, for sure. So if you look at the published literature, what you'll find is that if you're using any argument against nuclear energy that's not based on cost and schedule, it's based on misinformation. Any reason that you get out there in society against nuclear energy is based on some misunderstanding of the science about radiological risk or managing nuclear risk. Literally, the only arguments that you could come up with that are not contradicting the science is that they're expensive and they take a long time to build, around, say, 6.5 years, and something on the order of many, many billions of dollars. And so it's a very worthwhile investment. You get what you pay for. But yes, if you're not looking at cost and schedule, any argument that I've seen that in any way claims unacceptable radiological risk is based on misinformation. Full stop.